And what does that submission mean?
What that means is that all the prophets and messengers came aforetime. So this is the meta-narrative of Islam. Abraham came, Moses came, Jesus came, and all of them came with exactly the same message. And that message is to worship, to believe in one God, and to worship in only one God. And to do that, you have to follow a guidance. So each and every single one of those messengers, they came with, we believe in our narrative, they came with two things effectively. They came with a message, which is to worship God, meaning to submit to his laws, and also with some kind of evidence base to suggest that they are prophets. So some of these stories would have been known, obviously, to you. You've done a biblical series, so I know you're very aware of those stories. We have very similar stories, like in Moses, Abraham, Jesus, but they are slightly different. Those stories are slightly different. In fact, sometimes radically different, especially considering some New Testament kind of narratives. And so what the thread that joins, or the flesh that joins all of these kind of messengers and prophets, is that they all came with one fundamental message, which is to believe in one God, worship one God. We believe that the Prophet Muhammad...
So hang on. I'm still not understanding this exactly.
Okay.
I'm not sure what you mean by believe. Like the way you laid that out was in some sense propositional, right? You made a logical argument for the existence of God, but you take the existence of God as given in some sense to begin with because of your faith, and then you provide your belief with a rational argument, but it wasn't derived from a rational argument. And so when you talk about belief, do you mean belief in a set of propositions about the nature of God? And if you do or don't, what do you believe, and how would you separate out that belief from what you term as worship?
Right. So actually, there's one thing that ought to be known, that in Islamic theology, we believe in something called the fitrah, which is an innate instinct to believing in God. And now, I'm not sure if you're aware of the work on it.
So why bother with the propositional arguments then? To me, they just seem like a side venture, to argue with scientists.
Some scholars have said that in Islam. Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah. Okay. No.
In fact, some modern day philosophers of religion have that kind of a stance. Like, the thing is, it would be committing something like the naturalistic fallacy to suggest that just because something is the case, or there is ought fallacy maybe, just because something is the case, that it ought to be the case. So in order to prove it's a demonstrative proof for those who are in what we call shak or doubt. And but the truth is, as you've mentioned, and as in the literature, like for example, Justin Barrett has this in his cognitive psychological or cognitive science literature. I'm not sure if you've come across his stuff, but basically what he says is that we have an innate, his words exactly, receptivity to believing in God. In 2011, the Oxford Anthropological Society, they'd done a huge study of 32,000 children, and what they found was that children innately and intuitively, instinctively have a belief of a higher power of some sorts. Now, they're born with that belief. And in fact, in one of the papers in Justin Barrett's book, he literally mentions the fitrah, or the Islamic theological concept of an instinct in believing in God.
What's his last name?
Barrett.
How do you spell that?
I think RTT, I believe.
Justin Barrett. Okay, that's useful. Yeah, well, it just strikes me that you see, the problem with debating people like Richard Dawkins about the existence of God is that he will formulate the argument in propositional terms and then force the person, so to speak. I don't imply any malice on his part, but as soon as you accept that the battle is to be won on propositional grounds, you've already accepted a certain definition of God. And I think you lose the argument instantly. I think the argument for instinct, something like that, is much more powerful. Because one of the things I'm led to wonder when you laid out your argument is, well, what purpose does belief in God serve, or your faith in God, let's say? And I think belief, see, it's also really interesting to try to distinguish between belief in something and faith in something. Like if imagine you have faith in the good. And so how do you demonstrate that? Well, you believe that good is more powerful than evil. You believe that you should act in a manner that's appropriate to the good. And so then you act that way. And that's the faith. The faith is demonstrated in the actions.
Yes.
But it's
We
not
agree with
exactly
that.
it's not exactly propositional. And
Yep.
partly because I would say, if you look at good and evil, for example, it's not that easy to make the case that good is more dominant or more powerful than evil, all things considered, in human affairs. Now, I think it is, but you know what I mean? You can't make a compelling propositional case that that's absolutely true, but you can reflect your faith in your actions.
The thing is, you mentioned Richard Dawkins. I wrote, as part of the Sapiens Institute, we wrote a small booklet called The Scientific Delusions of the New Atheists. And we refuted him on these kind of things. If you read the God Delusion, he literally spends 5 pages of hundreds talking about the cosmological argument, and I think 2 talking about the teleological argument, or the fine-tuning argument. I do think that not much work has been done by new atheists, meaning like, the Four Horsemen or whatever, in trying to actually tackle these arguments. And sometimes when they're on debates with other philosophers of religion, I don't think they, from my perspective at least, they don't actually provide a satisfactory defense.
Yeah, well, the instinct argument is an interesting one, because it seems to me that part of and this is why I was pressing you to some degree on the issue of the definition of worship, is that I don't see much difference between the instinct to worship and the instinct to imitate. And I do believe that there's compelling evidence, psychological and biological, that we human beings have a remarkably strong instinct to imitate. And the question is, well, what is it that we're oriented to imitate? And I think like, if you look at the developmental psychology literature, for example, it seems to be the case that if a child has an intact nervous system and they have 1 or 2 good models around them, that they'll be drawn towards those good models and imitate them and develop quite healthily, even under rather stressful circumstances. And that instinct to imitate also underlies phenomena like the experience of awe and the experience of charisma. And that charisma, has an effect on attentional function and on the proclivity to behave. And so I think the propositionalized arguments deliver the religious ideas over to the propositional camp, and that's dominated already by scientists in many ways. It's a losing battle. I don't think it's the right one. So worship, so one thing the West and Islam agree on, although I think Islam is part of the West, by the way, because we're all people of the book. I mean, the triune God in the Christian sense is still subordinate to a higher order unity. And so there is a powerful movement towards monotheism in Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and that seems to be a point of some agreement. We're also, all 3 societies are also people who've made a decision collectively in some mysterious manner that a book should sit at the basis of culture, a specific book that's been aggregated in a strange way, in a mysterious way. And so we also agree on that. And so that's a starting place, at least. And obviously there's been a lot of interpenetration of ideas between Islam and Judaism and Christianity. I mean, the prophets in Islam are the same prophets that go through the 3 major Western monotheistic religions. And so that's a fair bit of commonality. And so that's a good place to start building bridges. And so Islam is stringently monotheistic. And then the submission idea, what exactly, I mean, God is ineffable in a sense. And so what does submission mean exactly?
Right.
And how is that related to worship? And how is that related to the good, let's say, on a practical level?
Right. So I think what you said before, there was a point you made about defining faith through action. And I think that we would strongly agree with that. And that's what we believe. Our definition of faith is what you basically believe in the heart, say on the tongue, and do with your actions. That's like a definition of faith for us, or iman, the idea of iman. In terms of the good, now there are different conceptions in Islam of the good, but the main thing is we believe that God is good, quite similar to what Christians believe, and therefore he wants good for human beings, and that the injunctions of God are also good. In terms of submission, and this is extremely important here, submission can only be done through revelation. That is our position. The position is that submission is actually impossible without a guidance, and the guidance we believe obviously is the Quran, but we also acknowledge the Torah, the original Torah that was sent to Moses, and the original Injil, or the gospel that was sent to Jesus. But what we have is, you can call it a doctrine of tahrif, which means corruption. So what we believe is that what happened is, with these books, you've had basically corruption happen to them. So we don't know what is part of that book and what is not part of that book. We don't know exactly what Jesus said and what isn't, because there is no clear chain of narration back to Jesus Christ. But going back to the point of submission is to follow the prophets, all of them, because a Muslim cannot be a Muslim unless they believe in, revere, love, and respect all of the prophets, including Jesus, Moses, Abraham, and all of them. Follow all of them and in their way. And once again, we believe that they were divinely inspired. So, and there is evidence that all of these prophets come with. And I think I was on that point when I was telling you that the differentiating factor between the Prophet Muhammad and the rest of the prophets is, we believe, whereas all of the other prophets came for their people and their time, we believe that Muhammad came for all people and all times.
Yes, well, that's certainly what Christians say about Christ.
Yes, but in the Bible, you'll find some verses that are saying, I've only been sent for the lost sheep of Israel.